Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about domain knowledge. So let's get into it. So the question in question was Frederick. Hi Frederick. By domain knowledge, do you mean business knowledge of a specific domain or company, or is it the software system architecture knowledge of a specific domain? Both. Uh, I'm not going to claim that this is perfect or that the definition that I use is the one that should be used, but it's the way at least I've been thinking about it for in my career. It's usually the case that you have two domains when you work in software. So you have your stack, or like the domain of the code, the source code, and not just the source code, but the system itself. And that's one part. And then you have the business domain. And so what I usually try to say, this is my analogy of what we software developers do, that I hope can sort of illustrate, it can give you a mental picture of how I think about our work. So if you've ever worked with, say, cloud providers, anything like that, you will know that a lot of these different services that they have are virtual versions of physical products. That it used to be like that you actually have a say like you get virtual machines or so forth and so forth, like which is a computer who might run on a rack somewhere and so forth and so forth. And for us software developers, when we model our code, we do so based on the same idea. Like basically what we're doing is that you and I, we are sitting down, we're creating these sorts of entities, which is, I argue, like the core and, heart and soul of object-oriented programming and domain-driven design and these sorts of things, where you define an object that might represent a user, a product, an order, etc., etc. And then you map that into, you create that in your code basically. And so what you're doing is that you're mapping the code itself to the business domain. And so when I say that you need to understand the domains of your system, that basically means that you have to understand the business domain so that you can model your system. But the system is in many cases more than just knowing the business domain, because if you think about it like how the business is running, most of the things you need to know to be effective is that you need to know what people are in it, how the company makes money, like how their different processes work, and so forth and so forth. So that's one part of your total domain, so to speak, which is critical for you to model your stack, or like not your stack, but to model the code domain, so to speak. But the code itself is not running, it's not like you just write all that down in a file and then that's it, right? You have things like delivery pipelines. You have, as I was saying, with cloud providers, you have different types of systems and like components in your overall system. So the source is one part, the server is one part, the database is one part, key vaults or session managers, or if you have like API gateways, or if you have like UI components and so forth and so forth. There's all these different entities that make up the whole system domain as a whole. And if you want to have like the closest thing I can describe this as is, if you look at one of those architectures diagram where flow charts where they have like a million boxes and there's like a box showing here is a user, they connect to that connects to that, and it's just like tons and tons of arrows everywhere. That is the idea behind that. This is the system domain, a system context, or a system landscape, depending on where if you're using C4 where you are. And that domain is the domain that you, of course, spend most of your time. And my argument is that both of these terms are correct because there are two domains. One is a virtualization of another one. So you can, if we want to be like object oriented about it, so the virtual, like the system domain, is a superset of the business domain. So the business dictates how the system is going to work, or basically what the system has to be able to do. But the system domain itself must include tons of other stuff apart from the things that you need to know about the business itself. So for quite a lot of developers, it's a bit of a challenge to do both of these, I find. Usually what happens is that a software developer takes the time to learn, say, a set of tools or something like that, and when they come into a new company, well, if you are going to survive, you're going to have to learn that specific system domain. And something that I find very often is that most software developers, they just learn like exactly the things that they need in order to just ship this given feature. But if you truly understand your system domain, then you probably can relate to that. You usually get messages from other software developers who ask you, where can I find this piece of documentation? This configuration isn't working, that isn't working, or so forth and so on. You basically become a little bit of a go-to. That's when you know the whole system domain. You don't just know the code or like the entities and so forth, which is, as I said, it's just a small, that's like the part that is directly connected to the business itself. That is just one part of the total domain. But all the things surrounding it, the operations and how certain integrations work and so forth and so forth, that is a hybrid of both those two. And I will go as far as to say that you can absolutely survive on just knowing the domain of the system, or like the code domains and so forth. And that's sadly what quite a lot of software developers do. They learn that part and that's it. But I've always found that you will need, if you want to be truly effective, you will need to know both of these things. I'm not saying that you have to know the business domain so well that you know every customer and every order that comes through, or how much revenue, or like these sorts of things. But I argue that when you reach true seniority and you have what we call a business mindset, you understand this fundamental truth I was saying, that the system is just a reflection, a more advanced reflection. Of course, there's tons of extra stuff that you have to have, but like the core of it is how the business itself and all the processes are working. That's why you're making the system. So if you don't understand that part even a little bit, it's going to be really hard to build a system that works really well. And I would say 9 times out of 10, when I see a system it doesn't really do what it's supposed, like it work well, it comes down to that thing, that the developers that built something that doesn't match all that well with the realities of the business and like this is what the stakeholders want and so forth. And that's why I always tell them, you can only gain from making sure that you know roughly how your business works. You know the people who are dependent, like that your dependents, like people that are using your system. If you know them a little bit and you know the realities of how they do work and how they think and so forth, I promise you your software will be better for it. So what I want you to take away from this is that when I talk about domains, usually I talk about 2 different types of domain, and both of these domains are to in their own right important to know about. So you have the business domain, which is just how the company you are working for, how do they make their money? What's the business model? Who are the stakeholders who are using your system? What needs do they have? What like challenges do they face and so forth? Because the system that you are building is there to fix usually a physical processes, as I said, with cloud providers and so forth. They're virtualizing something for you so that you don't have to own like 100 servers or something like that. They are creating entities that you can use in a digital landscape to do the thing that you want to do, right? To help you somehow, and then make money doing so, of course. And it's the same thing for you. You're trying to take all the needs of these people from the business domain and create a virtual representation which becomes your system domain. And your system domain will always be bigger because, as I said, you can write down all the entities and all the relationships and so forth in the flowchart and so forth, but like usually you have to think about that the business has a certain way of working, and all your systems and your microservices, your databases, your cloud infrastructure and so forth, all they're there to do is to enable that whatever value you're supposed to bring them works. And so you need to really, really know, as I said, what do you actually need to deliver and how do you do that without creating like mistakes in your architecture and things like that. And that means us to, you need how to write really good software, like in terms of just source code, if you want to do it well. That's usually what developers do, and that's why you have tech leads and these higher ups that are supposed to do this. I argue that this is a responsibility to every single good craftsman. I don't care if it's a software developer or whatever, you have to be able to do this, and people who ignore that part, in my opinion, will never like get to be a really, really great version of whatever they are. Because if you only care about, as I said, this tiny little piece, then you lose your holistic perspective of what's good for the entire system, because you don't understand the business domain and you don't understand fully how your own your stack or like your system domain works. Which is, as I said, if you go to any company, you see it all the time. If you ask 10 developers, where is a classic one, where is the onboarding documentation? Not all of them will know. even if there is some. Because like usually what happens is that when we talk about go-tos, not everybody is a go-to. You have people who are usually the go-to for someone, so that's the classic one. If you're getting at someone's name when you have a question from somebody else, that's probably the go-to. That's the person who's taken the time to understand the whole system domain, or at least more of it than somebody else. And the people who are really, really responsible here, like the best people, they, as I said, they know the source code. They know how the business domain works. They know how the ecosystem is set up, where all the accesses are and the different services and how things work and so forth. So they have a good holistic understanding of both of these two domains. And that is the person that, well, you should try to be that person if it's all possible, because it's probably the surest way that you're going to keep your job and that you're going to get promoted. That much I can basically promise you. Have a great day.